What's good, everybody? Welcome to another exciting episode of Full Circle. I'm your host, as always, older Harmon Jr. Please, 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 feel free to find me at older Harmon Jr. on all your favorite social media. Okay, everybody, I'm not gonna lie. We got to a slightly controversial episode ahead of us. And by controversial, I mean it's just gonna be a lot of opinions. A lot of opinions about a lot of things. This is the opinion episode. And ironically, most of it is in the indie sphere. So I had to bring that boy Josh Boykin back, the indie extraordinaire. You know him from a telegame and a whole bunch of other stuff. This man gets around, but just in case, Josh, they don't know. Tell people, who are you and what do you do?
You give me way too much credit. I appreciate it. It's good to see you as always. My name's Josh. I run Intelligame. I make connections between games in the real world. We do streaming. We're coming back to podcasting soon. Just basically try to make sure that there's a space where people can think a little bit more holistically about the ways that games tie to the real world, and the ways that we can be better people in the game space, in reality, all sorts of stuff, and have a good time too.
All right, that man, you're out here doing the work of God, man. I respect that because I feel like I'm fire. You're water. I'm all about the ride. You're about the calm. The rightful calm. You're about the. I create a ripple and a tidal wave will hit later.
It's just a contrast. We try to keep it real easy. It's just nice to have somebody who, because the problem is you listen to me too long, and then next thing you know, it's tomorrow morning, and you're like, I fell asleep, and sometimes you need somebody to bring some energy. So I appreciate that you are bringing that to full circle every week.
Always. So this week we're gonna do building intensity. We're gonna start off mildly controversial and build up to the bigger controversy. So we're gonna end the show on, in case you didn't know, there's a cool game out called Boyfriend Dungeon, and the strangest discourse, in my opinion, sprung from this that had nothing to do with the swords that you date and go fight monsters with. But we'll get into that. If you don't know already, you will know definitely by the end of the show. But before that, we are going to be talking about Fortnite's new imposter mode. And it's just funny because people forget that Fortnite, their original game, is not what it's known for. So if anything, this is just the original imposter keeping the MO going. But before all of that, we're going to start off with leaks. Yes, leaks. The game industry has always had leaks, but recently they have gotten out of hand. I'm talking about everything from the new Call of Duty Vanguard, everything from the Switch that did not happen, to just about there are very few games that are genuinely surprises. Like, kudos to Nintendo that Metroid Prime Dread was not leaked in any capacity. I don't know how y'all do it over there. But beyond that, we've entered this world where we have leaks and fake leaks. I'm not saying the Nintendo H4K thing was fake. Maybe it's still coming. God, I hope. But we've had this whole thing with Abandon now, and I don't even know what to call. What level of the game is this?
I don't know. Maybe it's one of those like strange bonus. Maybe it's like the warp world where like I don't know where we're going yet. I know that there are a few options. I'm not also sure how I got here. I think I might have broke the game to get here in the first place. Uh, yeah, leaks are. I think leaks are a real interesting concept because they're not. There are so many games now, right? There are so many games. There are, there's new stuff coming out every day. You've got a million different places where you can get your games, whether you get them from, Steam or from itch.io, or whether you buy them on a console or like any of these different things. Getting somebody's attention is a really significant part of getting somebody's money, right? That it's not like when, back in my day with the Super Nintendo and you get like 3 games released in a month, right? Like, and you're just like waiting for 3 months for your game to come out. There are tons of games coming out from the indie space, and so anyway, all of this is to say that like leaks are exciting, right? Like the concept of a leak, like, oh, we weren't supposed to know about this, but somebody posted an image on Reset Era about, whatever the thing is, right? Like that gets people paying attention. And it also gets people tweeting about it. It gets people writing articles about it. If you just put out a press release and you're like, oh, the new whatever happened, people will be interested. But people, when they feel like they discovered something, that feels more engaging. They're more excited about it. That gets the people next to them more excited about it. And so I do think that there are a number of like you know call them like fake leaks, right? Like kind of planned leaks. Oh, let's tell a few people or let's slip this, this hardware spec or this patent just over to a certain person and let them see, let them talk about it. But it just kind of feels like, and it probably always has been part of the marketing cycle, because it is harder and harder to get people's attention and sometimes you have to say like, hey, this is really exciting because you're not supposed to know about it. Everybody loves a secret, you know?
Man, I guess you're right. And, also another big leak. They're remaking Quake at QuakeCon. They're remaking what is it? Is the game called Quake? I don't know. They're
What,
reissuing.
the first one? Yeah, the original game, Quake?
Yeah, they're
Dang.
remaking Quake. It was released at QuakeCon. That's coming up in Dallas. They had the schedule released, and the schedule read something about to talk about new HD Quake and what's different. And then people were like, "Wait, what?" And then they had to like quickly change the schedule, for you Quake fans out there. Um,
Dang. That's cool.
I
There was
believe
one time I went to Oh, go ahead.
no, you.
No, there was one time I was at GDC. I'm like, this wasn't a leak. It was more of like a teaser. But there was this mobile game I used to play a lot of called Vainglory. And it was a 3v3 MOBA, kind of like, League of Legends or all that kind of stuff. But before, there are a lot of mobile MOBAs now, but it was like one of the first. And so there was a presentation that the CEO of the company was giving at GDC, and he was showing his PowerPoint presentation or whatever, and each of the slides was a different character from the game. And so like the next to last slide was a character that I'd never seen before. And I like regularly played the game, and so I was like, wait, what? Who is this? And like like obviously it wasn't quite a leak, right? It was a teaser because obviously he put it in his presentation. But for me, I was super excited because I was like, wait, like I actually play this game. I know that this is a reveal. And it turned out it was the first time that there was sort of a concept image for this next upcoming character. So that was cool. But I will admit there's an energy that comes from that, like you discovered something, you found it out. I mean, hell, games are doing it all the time now too. When that Amori and Undertale, and a number of other indie games where it's like you play the game, but then you dig in and like people are like, oh, I disassembled the source code and found this hidden reference to a whatever. Like people love to feel smart and adventurous and have something exciting. I mean,
Uh,
hell, Beyonce did it. Lemonade dropped. Lemonade dropped. I legitimately think that a big portion of why is because when Lemonade dropped and sold stupid numbers of copies, people were like, "Oh, we don't have to do 6 months of press ahead of time. People are just excited. They'll just go do it." Yeah, Beyonce. I mean, we all know Beyonce was going to change the game, and
yeah,
6 ways to Sunday. But like, who knew that she would actually be changing games too?
nice. I like what you did there. I just did a real quick. It's called the revitalized edition per the leak. And so for people who like Quake and was around that era, I'm pretty sure they're going cuckoo bananas. But
Right.
it's just so I guess we reached a point now where I'm like, our league's starting to get detrimental, not in the sense that they announced the new Call of Duty, so they have to make the official announcement. No, but
Okay.
I mean in terms of like clearly abandoned. I guess I don't know what that is. That's nonsense to me. But like, let's look at the Switch. These leaks were the leak about the HD Switch, 4K Switch. It already has HD. The 4K Switch were so widespread, so believable, and it didn't happen. Like I feel like the
Yeah.
OLED is going to suffer because it wasn't the leak that we had been told for months was going to happen.
I mean, like, I don't know. You know, it's possible that Nintendo could have come out and been like, "Hey, we have something new. It's not this. Y'all return to your lives," you know? Um, but the difficulty is that like it is shockingly easy for people to drum up, fake prototype specs or, report on something. And to be honest, I don't actually know that it necessarily like super hurt Nintendo. Like, so for me, part of the hardcore space or whatever, right? If you had told me a new Switch is coming out and it's slightly larger and it has an OLED screen, it has a slightly a brighter with darker blacks screen and it's got a better viewing angle, I'd have been like, okay. I mean like that, whatever. I almost don't know why you released it, right? And I might not have, I don't, I'm not typically the person who writes about these kinds of articles. So like, but I'm saying that if I was, I probably wouldn't be super excited about it. But a bunch of people were real excited and talking about the idea of like, wait, a 4K Switch? I was intrigued by the idea of a 4K Switch. Most of the people who would write articles about a Switch would be more excited about a 4K Switch than an OLED Switch. So all these people are writing articles about 4K Switch, 4K Switch, 4K Switch. Then the announcement comes out and it's like, oh, it's the OLED Switch. And people are like, oh, I'm so upset. I'm big mad. Like Nintendo doesn't care because they just got all this press about how they've got a new model Switch coming out. And frankly, even though I don't super care about there being an OLED screen and it being slightly larger, I have still tried to track down that white OLED Switch for pre-order. Like so it's hard for me to say that it is doing them harm because it again, it's about drumming up that excitement. It's getting people hype about a thing. And like I I imagine that the OLED Switch is still going to sell quite well. Every time I've tried to pre-order it, those pre-orders vanish the second I get to the website. Who knows how many will actually be available because obviously like the electronics issues and chip shortages and all of that stuff going on. But I don't know that I would have heard about or cared about it as much if somebody had just told me it's going to be slightly bigger with a brighter screen. I'd be like, oh, well, I got one already, so thanks. You know?
All right, just real quick question before we move on. The whole
Yeah.
abandoned situation, we won't go into detail. Do you think this is leak marketing, whatever you want to call it, done poorly and ultimately will hurt whatever, if assuming there isn't even a game at this point?
I don't actually know Abandon. So
The
I guess maybe it hasn't been leaked enough for me.
oh no that's the game, that's the not Hideo Kojima game, that's the not Silent Hill game, that's
Oh, yeah, I
yeah.
think I do remember hearing a little bit about that, and I don't know. I mean, like I remember that they said that like there was an article and I can't remember who what site I read it on where they were like, "Hey, okay, we actually sat down with the creators of this game and they gave us a full like a breakdown of what the plot's going to be like and showed us all of this stuff and it turns out the game does exist and it's also not Silent Hill." Like um which is cool. But I do think that it's sort of this delicate dance of marketing, because it is hard, I think, to capture somebody's attention. And that's, especially for these games that are sitting, being worked on for years at a time and, in secret. Um, you just never know how that's going to pan out.
Yeah. Well, that's true, but going on to now some of our meat and potatoes. For all those, I'm laughing just thinking about it. For all those who don't know, Fortnite has a new mode called Imposter Mode coming out. Where, and have you played Among Us? It's exactly that. You get a group of people. Somebody is the imposter trying to kill everyone. Everyone else goes around and tries to, guess who the imposter is and inject them. And okay, before we get into this, there's a real interesting question now that used to be cut and dry for me, and now with this move, it's no longer cut and dry for me. At one point, does a game mode genre of game become almost an intellectual property in and within its own self? Do you think that's even possible in a medium such as games, Josh? Before we even get into the meat and potatoes of this, let's talk about that first.
Yeah, so like so I do want to preface before getting too deep into it that so the next couple topics that we are about to broach, these are companies that I have worked with in the past. So I've told you that I work with Dual Wield Studio that does merchandising and licensing. One of their clients is Innersloth. So like and then I've done some work with Kitfox in the past. I say all that to say that A, my opinions do not represent any of these folks, and B, um, I B, I would not suppose to, I would not try to put any words in anybody's mouth or speak for what they have said or any of those kinds of things. I know that they've got all sorts of internal discussions that they have about the ways that they've handled any of their situations. I do have a lot of love and respect for both of those companies and for the folks who are working hard to make some really amazing indie games. So that that will be my preface going into any of those discussions. Do I think that you can essentially put like intellectual property rights on a game? I think you can. Probably, I imagine that
Yeah.
legally you could put a trademark out. You could, um, probably patent a thing. There have been some tweets that folks have talked about. I believe Puffballs United talked about like how they could have patented um, like the task system in Among Us, but that they decided not to because they didn't want to stifle creativity. They didn't want to stop people from being able to develop in the game space, like other indie game creators who might get shut down that were inspired by Among Us. It's just real frustrating, I think, uh when you have this like mega corporation with, more money than whatever that comes in and like, you know, uses the same terminology and the same gameplay mechanics and a real similar map and you can see all the different ways that I think members of the team have tweeted one way or another. Some of the members of the team have tweeted one way or another that like there's I, I think that right? It's not necessarily that there'll never be another social deduction game. It's not, like we know that before Among Us, there was Mafia and Town of Salem, and there were other social deduction genre games. But like that's a little different than being like, who's the imposter? And it's imposter, like the same spelling of imposter. And like you've seen the image of like the start screen that says like you're an imposter, and like it just yeah, I think that there's a certain extent to where you can say like they say that what imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, but not when it is taking money. Like that's not I don't know that's necessarily flattery anymore.
Yeah. So here's the interesting thing about this. So, you know, can you IP a game mode? I feel like generally answer is no, but I feel like maybe we're getting an era to where we need to. Because, okay, clearly you think about like back in the 16-bit era, everybody wanted to be a Mario clone. Everyone had a Mario clone. In the sense that they were all side-scrolling platformers. And, you know, side-scrolling platformers are genre, basically. And yeah,
Hmm.
you run, you're jumping on things. But there's a certain level. One, they never did it as good as Mario. And two, they all had things that made them generally different or different enough because Mario, you're just running side to side jumping on the thing, and I think Mario in a way was just the first one to perfect that, to just you know and so and it was like everyone else was like, but you think Sonic, like you would never consider Mario and Sonic the same type of game or gameplay, but at the end of the day you're moving left to right, but
Sure.
they're still dramatically different at their core. And think about first person shooters. Everything used to be a Doom clone at one point. Just because you're in first person, you're shooting things. But they're still dramatically, fundamentally, spiritually different. And then I remember, because you remember people, Fortnite was originally in this discussion because Fortnite is a tower defense game against zombies. That's what
Mm.
Fortnite, the original IP game, was. It didn't get a lot of love. And then, if you remember, player PUBG was a thing. And Fortnite took the PUBG formula and put their spirit into it. And I
I
remember,
mean, they
huh?
I will say they did more than put their spirit into it because PUBG was a pay game, and Fortnite came through and released a free-to-play mode that was battle royale when there weren't other folks out there really doing the battle royale thing. So I mean, so it was like, yeah, okay, you brought in, cartoonish and in the building and whatever, but they also drastically undercut the cost of their competitors, and they could afford to because they were Epic.
Oh no, no doubt. Because you remember there were actually lawsuits about that. I was getting that, and ultimately, Epic came out clean because I would say because one, they had an established game that took it formulas. It was really the building and the cartoony. Again, that's why I said there was enough spirit, like Sonic versus
Yeah,
Mario,
yeah, yeah.
to where I felt like okay, yeah, no, there. And then Battle Royale as a mode became uber popular. Every game had to have it. Apex Legend came and killed it, in my opinion, in terms of battle royale. And at that point, PUBG sadly would have no case against Epic because now it's become like saying like is deathmatch a mode that's only unique to Halo or so. But and
Right.
so Epic kind of won that, and I kind of sided with Epic. I was like, it's different. I was like, it's unfortunate that this became way more popular than PUBG. At this point, that's just fundamentally true, people. I'm not trying to say PUBG doesn't do numbers. I'm not saying PUBG isn't successful. But let's be real. An 80-year-old granny knows what Fortnite is. Like, it's reached that level. But now, this is clear theft. Like, it almost feels it's so on the nose and intentional that like I can't think of any other word for it. And like you said, they have the money, they have the infrastructure, and it's just like okay, my thing is like you did this once, fool me once, shame on me, right? Fool me twice, shame on you. Now it's like, okay, no, this is just wrong. And that's just how I feel about it. Like there's really no other way because one, you didn't need to do this. You honestly didn't. There was no reason to do this. But and the thing is, the reason it's wrong because Among Us was out what 2 years before it caught steam.
Hmm.
Not the service, but people the
Yeah, yeah,
caught
yeah, of course,
traction.
right. Before it got its sort of like viral popularity.
Yeah, so now it's like clearly this is a clear intention, it's gonna be like what's next. Here's our fall guys, here's our obstacle course, which honestly could work with the way Fortnite is. Here's a fun obstacle course where instead of shooting each other, you gotta push everybody off, and it's like, okay, bro, it's one of those things. Okay, let's say everything they do is legal. At the very least, I'm like, this is just in poor taste to me. Like this is something you respectively shouldn't do.
Yeah,
Is how
yeah,
I feel about it ultimately.
yeah. I mean, and I totally agree. I think that the difficulty again, and I think that you bring up I think the point that you bring up is important. The regardless of whether or not it's legal, right? Like I'm certainly not here to lawyer any of that stuff, right? But it's that concept of like, I guess what we feel like the game space is supposed to be. And I think especially for me, as somebody who's worked in indie games for the past, who I guess has specialized in indie games, even though I've written about and worked with all kinds of games. Um, there's a real collaborative spirit in the indie space, right? Like it's a bunch of people who want to like get to know each other and like share ways that they solve situations and be like, hey, have your character guest in my game or whatever. It's like I've one of the things that was always so exciting to me about the indie space was feeling like it wasn't about shutting down all the competition and being number one. It was about bringing these games to light and everybody having a chance to tell their stories, to make their games, and to be successful together because there's tons of opportunity in the market. And a situation like this, is, I think, an unfortunate reminder that there are folks out there for whom business is probably still just business, you know? Um, and I think that's maybe the part that hurts, is that you're used to being in this space and being around games where obviously the game industry has any number of issues that we're actively trying to work on, but um, to have a, giant multi million billion dollar corporation or whatever come in and take, not just, to go back to what you were saying, it's not just, this isn't a genre, this isn't you took moving a character from left to right. Like, you've taken terminology, you've taken, individual gameplay mechanics, you've design concepts, and there have been people on Twitter who've pushed back and said, like, well, but they came up with a plot that they integrated into the Fortnite story, and they, have these weapons and, whatever. But, like, there's no denying that they've taken the fundamental framework of not social deduction. This isn't a just social deduction game. They've very much taken the framework that was popularized by Among Us, I mean, hell, even using that imposter with an OR, like, that's the same thing that we see in Among Us. So yeah, I think it's really disappointing, especially to see from a company like Epic, which, not long ago we were trying to go to bat for, because they, were providing a better developer split to, when you purchase something on the Epic Game Store versus purchasing it on Steam. They're hosting like itch.io and other things. So it feels like this company that traditionally could have was standing for indies, or in some ways was standing for indies, seems to have really um shown its whole ass. No. um yeah, probably have to edit that one out. A company that was standing for indies has really just shown another side of itself that is real disappointing.
Yeah, and here I'm about to say something, and it's gonna be like, I don't know if anyone said this already, but the crazy thing about this actually could have really worked out for both people, because Fortnite has become a cultural movement, in the
Sure.
same sense that Among Us became a cultural movement, into where, like, people who don't normally play video games were playing it, like, oh, we need a company bonding exercise. And I've heard this before, and people were like, how about we play Among Us, as a,
Hmm.
especially with the pandemic and everything. And I'm like, that's great. And, being the cultural icon Fortnite is, with concerts with Ariana Grande, I'm still tripping over that. Like,
Hmm.
Will Smith
That
is
was
now,
wild.
yeah, Will Smith is now coming to Fortnite. That's another leak, by the way. So, yeah, full circle the leaks. um, it's like, okay, this is how this all could have been salvaged. So Fortnite goes. I don't know what the Among Us people are called, but the imposters coming to Fortnite, and, the
Hmm.
Among Us characters running,
Yeah,
pulling out their
crewmates,
little,
imposters.
yeah, pulling out their little holding guns. There, like, you could have had crazy, as a timed event, and with the timed event, there's now a new mode in Fortnite, timed, emphasis on time, where, it's the imposter mode that coincides with, Among Us being the new character they're bringing to Fortnite. Because you're gonna, you bring that in, that puts spotlight on Fortnite. People are gonna be like, oh, the Fortnite character, I mean, the Among Us characters in Fortnite. Oh, I gotta check out Among Us. Oh, I'm playing this imposter mode. Oh, it's really fun, but it's a timed Among Us event. So if I really enjoy it when it ends, I will go to Among Us and keep playing this mode. That's basically it. And I feel like that would have been the collab of the century. It's a win-win for everyone, and I'm pretty sure, I'm 99.9% sure that conversation never happened. And imagine it, because I felt like it's a win-win. Excuse me, it's a win-win for both sides. No one's jaded or cheated, and I'm just like, you've collabed with LeBron James, Travis Scott,
Hmm.
Thanos. It it baffles me, with all these impossible collabs you made happen, that instead of doing that, you just jack the concept. I that's another reason why to me it just feels so distasteful.
Yeah. Yeah, I I think that players would have really appreciated getting a chance to, have crewmates or imposters in Fortnite. Um, I'm not privy to any of those conversations, so I don't know, um, but I agree. It feels like if you can bring Ariana Grande and Ariana Grande skins into Fortnite, it's kind of hard for me to believe it's like, oh, crewmates aren't a good fit for the world of Fortnite. Like, you have freaking Marvel and DC and pop stars and LeBron James. Like, all these people can show up in Fortnite and carry guns and floss, but not a crewmate. I don't know. That's hard for me to believe.
Oh man, that is, I don't know, man. Just it's just wild. It's just wild. But
Yeah.
all right, people, I told you we're elevating higher and higher this week. Normally, I try to do a sandwich of of meaty with light, on either side of it. But nah, this week I'm trying something new. Heart rate's going higher, so
Keep the energy up.
keep the energy up. All right, people. So boyfriend dungeon, like I talked about earlier in the show, and I was like, maybe y'all have heard about it, but not. But boyfriend dungeon is the new RPG dungeon crawler literary novel. I mean visual novel. Excuse me. It fits many different boxes. But mainly I guess at its core it's primarily a dating sim, or at least that's how the game wants to be known. You date your weapons, the deeper bond you get with your weapons, the stronger they get, etc. But this game featured one of the potential mates, boyfriends, partners, whatever the terminology is exactly for the weapons in this game, is a stalker essentially. And he's a stalker to your main character or whatever. And it's triggered some people online that had some real world interactions with a stalker. At least I assume they did with the pandemonium they raised from this. And from this, they said that they felt harmed by the game's lack of a consent warning. That some type of warning the game should have provided, letting you know that it was going to deal with certain themes, and for the player to consent to those themes because they were blindsided in a way that harmed them. And it really became this discussion online, really bashing this game and demanding something of this game, which I, in my personal opinion, think is just utter nonsense. Especially when we have ratings like movies and games. This content, the ESRB ratings, the teen, mature, so on and so forth. That they really drug this game through the mud, for lack of a better term. But honestly, for something that, one, we've never had in games or requested the games, but two, we don't request of other media. And it really became, for me, this discussion of games is still new, and as a format, people talk about this all the time. And we're still, growing pains. There's still things that people have discussion about games grow and evolve, and we really figure out what games are. But then we have discussions like this where I feel like, when are people asking too much of a game? Or when are people, because there's a difference to me from trying to enlighten people and then just being vindictive towards a product. And I feel this was the latter of the situation.
So I think that there are a number of layers to approach here. And you hit a bunch of interesting points. One of the things that just about, I don't know, 4 minutes ago, I was talking about how I feel like I've worked in indie games for a decade. I haven't. I don't think that working in indie games for a decade, like, what did you work on? Braid? No. The the evolution of indie games as a space, as a discourse medium, as a storytelling medium has changed and grown so much. And like you said, the um games are still young as a whole, But I think particularly when we talk about indie games, games that are made by small teams of people, that can have much more intimate discussions and tones, whether, sexually or emotionally or whatever, like this is brand new territory in a lot of different ways. And I think that we are also trying to figure out at the same time as like how do we make games that handle these themes well, we're also trying to figure out societally how to make sure that we are making space for people who've gone through any range of experiences that we've typically overlooked, right? Whether it's black folks, LGBT folks, other racially marginalized folks, Asian folks, like there are so many different ways that we're all trying to figure out how do we make sure we're being respectful of other people, right? And in the midst of all that, we also have games, this constantly growing medium that we know has some not great people in it, but also some really amazing people doing some really amazing work. For a game like I think about actually Doki Doki Literature Club as a somewhat analogous in that it's surprising, right? That you're playing it and you think you know what's happening, and then a thing happens, and you're like, oh, oh, this is actually very different and also very uncomfortable. Um, I appreciate that Boyfriend Dungeon provides a space for people to learn and to engage. And I think that when the feedback came through that people were upset or taken aback and that they wanted additional warning, like the team responded. They said like we got this feedback, we're going to enhance our content wording. They all and this is the part that I think is really important, is that they already tried to do so much, right? Like they already had content warnings at the beginning of the game that talked about potentially triggering scenarios that were going to be that were going to show up in the game. They even put in the option. They said that like there's a character named Mom who's going to like send you text messages, and if you don't want those messages, just tell us, and we will have you not get those messages. And and what I think happened is that because the game already seems to take, no, not seems to take, because the game already takes so much care for so many different situations, that when people were put into a situation in which they felt unsafe, they were surprised because they didn't have the heads up. It's like, hey, be wary of the spike trap and the arrows shooting out of the walls. And then you're like, okay, no spike trap, no arrows shooting out of the walls. And then like a zombie comes out and bites you, and you're like, why didn't you tell me about the zombie? And I think that maybe is what happened in people's minds. Providing that feedback and saying like, hey, I think that this thing should have been called out. That's reasonable. What's not reasonable is harassing the voice actor who played the character. What's not reasonable is harassing the developers. And like there's an entire different level of like, I think all of this is to say that like they they've done so much work to try and accommodate for people and their sensitivities. And I think that that work is very much to be respected and to be admired and to be emulated. And even if it is, there are places where you can miss the mark. It totally happens, you know. But I do think that there is a pretty big difference um, between what we were hoping for and what ended up happening. I will also admit that to a certain extent, um, I know that there has been a lot of discourse that has evolved around like framing this as a discussion about accessibility and things of that nature, and I'm not sure that juxtaposing some of those terms is super appropriate, but I can also admit that like I'm as somebody who is not like a disabled gamer, I'm not going to be a great person to lend a commentary on whether or not talking about a content warning for stalking is equivalent to a an accessibility issue. But I do think that it is reasonable for somebody to just say, regardless of whether or not it's about accessibility or whatever, you can say like this was just uncomfortable for me. I played the game on stream last Wednesday, and like you get text messages from the different Beyblades, their different weapon partners, as well as your cousin Jesse and your mom, and like you'll come back in from a mission and you'll get like literally like 18 texts, and you get a little pop-up every time you get a text, and it's like one from your mom, one from this guy, one from this guy, one from this gal, one from this person, one from this person, and that is a trigger for me. Like I legitimately like it has something to do with like ADHD and like whatever. Like my phone is always on silent because if it just starts bing, 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 I'm like, did somebody die? How many things do I have to take care of that like it legitimately is an anxious situation for me. And so I talked about it on stream and I was like, I wish I could put my phone on silent right now, you know? Um, but I wouldn't classify that as an accessibility issue. I wouldn't, like that is a personal discomfort, but I can also acknowledge that there's a big difference between uh you got a bunch of text messages and that makes you uncomfortable, and you're being stalked by a a a character in this game that you can't get away from. I don't know of a way that, like, based on my understanding of the plot, I don't know of a way that you'd be able to be like, hey, let's remove this character from the plot. Um, but yeah, I think that a lot of the fallout that showed up for that is really unfortunate because I really do have a lot of respect for the team. I know that they worked super hard on this game for a really long time, and I think that seeing and feeling a community like not just give you feedback but lash out, I imagine is really tough to deal with. I think it would hurt me a lot. And I think that they really did make a fantastic game that a lot of people have really appreciated. And yeah.
Yeah, so I'm gonna take what some people might consider a harsh stance on this and say that one, they did nothing wrong from A to Z, in my personal opinion, because they gave a content warning to the best of their ability without spoiling anything. But to me, it's like, where do you draw the line? For example, let's just say you say this game has nudity. Someone acknowledges that, within the the warnings, the ratings, and all that good stuff. Now that can range anything from just a woman being topless to private parts of male, female, and anything in between. You know what I'm saying? That just falls under that umbrella. When things says has suggestive sexual themes, uncomfortable themes within that space, you may not know what it is exactly, but it's going to be there. And like you said, I'm glad you said different things trigger different people. So the stalking might not have triggered me, but someone touching me unprovoked, as simple as a hand on the shoulder might be a trigger for me, and it could be a big one. And I'm not saying that's not valid. But the point is, I knew going into this, it was going to have those themes. There was going to be a risk, if you will. Because when a game says it has violence in it, right? And it's rated M for mature, that can literally be anything from beating someone to death in The Last of Us to just cutting off a leg with minor blood. Minor being suggestive. You know what I'm saying? There's a wide spectrum of extremes it could be on. It can just be literally, we did just a tiny bit, but because of that, it now has to be rated M because it's on the spectrum. And it could be something like, Doom, where I'm punching a demon through his abdomen with another demon's skull. And so I think as a reasonable adult, because that's what the game is geared towards, that's what the ratings for. As an adult, you have to make conscious decisions about the content you receive. Like, I don't really watch horror movies that have a lot of gore because I can't stomach someone getting ripped apart, quite literally. I just can't. Now, going into this scary movie, right? I know it's a scary movie. I know its rating is R for, the usual ticks. Now, I might not have known going in that people were going to be ripped apart, but I knew to some degree people were going to be dying. I can't fault the studio, the creators, for not specifically telling me every possible thing, because you know what I'm saying. No one's gonna give you a script or a play-by-play. Like, that's just not how it works. Now, I do find it stalking is a serious matter. I'm sorry that offended someone, and I feel like if they were just like, hey, this really affected me, I'm just gonna be honest. Stop playing the game. Stop playing the game. Maybe, reach out and be like, hey, maybe this is something, it triggered me so bad that maybe you should edit this warning, right? But in no way did they ever do that with the intention of surprising you to, make someone relive their trauma. I feel like if this was not made for mature audience, if this was something E for everybody, T for teens, a much lower rating, I'd be like, okay, this makes sense, because you preface this with this being a thing for a broad group of people. But now here's this thing that I now feel like is for mature audiences, or people who are developed, or maybe people who may have the willing to deal with this. But so at my point, I feel like shout out to them for doing the right thing, to addressing it, being as forthcoming, as transparent as they possibly could. But I really feel like this is more self accountability.
So I'm gonna come in with a couple of points. I usually don't. I feel like first off, um, because while you were bringing stuff up, I was like, let me hit them Googles real quick. Let me type on them keys. Because there's a site called
Mm-hmm.
contentphobias.com. And the reason that I bring that up is because or I'm sorry, it's called Game Phobias.
Okay.
There's another one called Trigger Warning Database that's for books, but there's a site called Game Phobias, and the reason that I bring this up is because when I was streaming The Walking Dead, like I knew that this was a mature rated game. I know that it's a zombie game, right? But I still don't have a clear understanding of like what exactly am I going to be taking my stream audience through. And the only way that I get to find that out is to play it. But I also feel like as a streamer, I want to make sure that if I'm going to take somebody through something that's going to be sensitive to them, I give them a heads up. If I don't know what those triggers are, I can't do that. And if I just get sort of a like, oh, well, I know it's rated M, good luck. Disco Elysium was actually a game that we were streaming where I still, because I haven't played it, have no idea all of the different triggers that are present in that game. But I thankfully had other people who had played it and they were like, "Yo, Josh, like I know how you stream and I know the community you run. These are things you need to give people a heads up about." And those were not explicitly called out in the game, but they were called out I believe on Game Phobias.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a way for people to dodge some of those things. So I bring that up at the beginning as a call out to any listeners who, if you're the kind of person who wants those detailed trigger warnings or content warnings that may not be in the game, that might be a place for you to go, especially a few days after the game has come out, to figure out, hey, maybe I'm feeling a little sensitive about this. Now, the when Boyfriend Dungeon's ESRB rating is actually T for teen.
Oh.
So it's not a mature rated game. And the content warning that they originally had was why isn't it up on my screen anymore? See, that's what I get coming in here acting like I'm prepared and then having all this nonsense. Hold on. Um, so the original warning that Boyfriend Dungeon had said this game includes references to unwanted advances, stalking, and other forms of emotional manipulation. Play with care. So, like, I do feel like to a certain extent, it's, you probably could feel like, well, emotional manipulation, stalking,
I'm
those,
out.
it's right there, those words are called out. But I can also, there, there's a part of me that can understand if somebody was like, oh, well, if you're making references to stalking, that's different than like potentially my character being actively stalked, right? So again, I'm not necessarily, I can understand if somebody if the studio took the feedback and said, we think it would be more appropriate for us to have a more detailed warning so that people have an understanding of what we are warning them of, right? If I just tell you watch out and you're like, watch out for what? Like there are any number of things that you go to a baseball game and you say heads up, and one of the first thing people do is look up so that they can get hit in the face with a baseball. So like I understand that. I think that the concept of, again, having that discussion of should we change, we've already said, like, yes, we want to be considerate of our players and our player base. So if the dev team decides that that's a change that they want to make, I respect them making that change. What I the place where I feel like the discourse goes way off the rails is for people to if people are suggesting that the developers are like trying to harm people through their lack of whatever, I don't think that's appropriate. If people are again harassing the developers, harassing the voice actor who portrayed this character, particularly when we know that like there are any number of games being made out there by trash people to convey trash opinions that are not like trying to create a space where people can healthily engage in any number of different like romantic behaviors with people of different genders. Like there are so many progressive thoughtful things that Boyfriend Dungeon is doing. Like these are folks who are trying to make a game that does right by people of all sorts of different backgrounds. And so to come down on them with this sort of like fury and I think that's the place where it just like it is really disheartening, because I want to believe that we can recognize when there are folks who are on our same team, and that you don't have to have gotten it perfect, but that we can get closer to perfect together. But if that is only going to happen by, by, trying to burn folks at the stake, I think it makes it really difficult for people to want to feel safe in trying to create that positive media, because it, it, that hurt, that has to suck. That has to hurt a lot.
Yeah.
And games is a rough place to be successful financially, emotionally. Like it's a tough space in general. So I again, I'm not going to begrudge people who say like, hey, I wish that there had been a more precise direction on that content warning. Because I think that having that statement and having that opinion is okay and something that we should engage with. But I think that it escalated to a level um, that is not okay, and to me does not make sense.
Yeah. And I will agree with you. I will not begrudge people who felt like there should have been more transparency, clarity, etc. with that. That's fair.
Sure.
What I will say, and what I will come after, 6 ways to Sunday, bring that back, is that I'm not a fan of bullies. And what I feel like is
Absolutely.
a lot of people chose to bully this game because it was small, relatively speaking. Because we have games like Grand Theft Auto, and
Hmm.
I was probably triggered at one point. You know what I mean? It's the nature of the beast. But
Yeah.
that's a big studio, and you're not gonna bully them into nothing. You can't come at them. I mean, you could try. It's not gonna do
Right.
you any good, probably. You know what I'm saying? And what I
Hmm.
felt like is this was a group of people who felt triggered. And I'm not saying that them being triggered was wrong. Like you have a right to be triggered, whatever triggers you. You know what I'm saying? That's your life, and it's gonna be different for different people. But how they came at them, I felt like was like, oh, you're small. You're a small, dev team. Again, relatively speaking, I'm not trying to say they're small, they're team any, but and I felt like these were people attacking something that in their mind was small enough that they can gang up on and crush. Like I feel offended. Now my desire isn't to move the needle forward, but to crush you in every sense of the word. And I felt like that's what the discourse became, and I'm like, that's not right, because what good, you know what good is that doing them? Because now you're creating triggers for them. You know, someone like you said tried to do right, tried to do good, and now here you are destroying everything that they built, any good that they possibly could have had in the world. And you know it's and I just it just doesn't sit well with me, especially because you know, like I said, ultimately, ultimately, you could have this going forward, but if something ever reached a point where it was beyond your means to handle, you can always turn it off. You can stop. You know, you can be like, and yeah, it is sad that there's some parts of certain games that like this part of this game is so jarring. Like you know, there's some games that have torture scenes that have a death of children or having you doing horrific things. And some people like, I want to play this game, I want to progress, but there's this just huge wall I can't get by. And I get that does truly suck, especially in a game that you're enjoying. But unfortunately, it just it comes to territory. Same thing with movies and books. This isn't a problem unique to video games. So I just felt like that if you're gonna come, at least come correct or not at all. Because if your intention was to destroy, then triggered or not, I just feel like you're just not in the right place. Like not mentally, but like just you're not in the situation. If you're not trying to make the world better. If anything, it's the whole hurt people. You've been hurt, and your only response is to hurt the thing that hurts you. And I'm just like, that's just not how we do it. And I feel like the game industry space, a vocal minority as they call it, we've grown into this realm where it's kind of the second anything upsets you, no matter how big or small, that means you destroy it. You disrespect this name, so on and so forth. So that's why but the level of this discourse, I'm just like, is a reoccurring theme in our industry, and I'm just like, I feel like we need to stop and talk about the accountability on both sides. It's just my main thing, because if no one will, I'll be the guy to be like, all right, we looked at the dev side, but now let's look at the players, because just because we are the players doesn't make us in the right because we're deciding to consume this medium. It doesn't make us free of any wrongdoing or liability. Right. That's all I really have to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes perfect sense. I do very much think that you can look all the way back. The part of the problem is that like you can look all the way back to Mass Effect 3, right? And their harassment campaigns and the all of the different stuff that happened in the wake of Mass Effect 3's ending, right? And it was a terrible experience for a lot of people on that team. I can guarantee it. Creating the new ending, I frankly think that creating the new ending was a good idea. I did not enjoy the ending of Mass Effect 3, the original ending of Mass Effect 3, but that doesn't mean that it justifies blatant harassment. The conduct by which the players, or the conduct with which the players treated the developers, completely unacceptable. But unfortunately, those changes also then incentivize, to a certain extent, to some of those people, incentivizes that behavior, right? It's the same thing that you see when you go to the grocery store and somebody goes through and is like, hey, I'm sorry, I'm past the return policy, but can I return this thing? And you're like, oh, well, nope, sorry, it's past the return policy, and then they leave and they're SOL. In the meantime, somebody else comes in, this is unacceptable and blah, blah, blah. And they're like, it's past the return policy. Well, this is terrible and I'm going to speak to the manager. And then they, yell at the manager, and then the manager gives them their money back because because nobody's getting paid enough under capitalism to get attacked. And so, well, nobody working in those positions is, so I think that there is a difficulty, right? Because I have to imagine that there's a certain extent where it feels frustrating to know that there are people who will feel like the way that they engage and the way that they get what they want is to be, toxic on Twitter and to post terrible things and to send terrible DMs, and then that's what gets the change that they want. But I think, like you said, like, there does need to be a clear discussion of like, what are the ways that you can communicate like a human being to these people who are human beings, about these things that you care about as a human being, right? What are the ways that you can be respectful and look for feedback and accept answers that sometimes aren't always the thing exactly that you want? But like, but I also do think, and there's a book that I think is really important when we get onto subjects like this of sort of like the power of the internet in mass. It's called So You've Been Publicly Shamed. It's by, I believe, John Ronson, and he basically studied a number of situations of what we might term internet cancellations, or places where the internet has just kind of, well, the whole full force of the internet feels like it has fallen on a single figure. I mean, if you look at, for instance, like Monica Lewinsky might have been a prototype for that, where it's not necessarily the full internet, but everybody is just this big media storm on this one woman who is involved in this situation with a man who had a ridiculous amount of power, and like look at the ways that everybody came down on her and all of that. Um, anyway, all of this is to say that, like, I do think that there are people who may have looked at KitFox as a studio that's like, oh, this is a small group of folks that we can crush and, push around or whatever because they're not EA. They might have also said this is a small group of people, so when we do this, they'll actually hear it, and so I'm gonna be angry. But I also think that there are some folks out there who probably don't know that, like KitFox or, is a smaller dev team. They don't know. They just are upset and they keyboard smash because they're being reactive, and they don't know that they're actually hurting a group of people on the other side of these screens who have to deal with this feedback and have been working on this project for years. And like, that is, I think you bring up a fantastic point. That does need to be part of this discussion. How do we teach people to understand the power that they're wielding when they're on the internet? And also, how do we get people who create the tools through which we wield power on the internet to maybe like get stuff together so that we're incentivizing positive behavior instead of whatever toxic stuff that builds up retweets and likes and hurts people in the process.
Yeah, most definitely. And people, I want y'all to chew on that. You know, you can add us. You know what I'm saying? We can keep the discussion going. But we're out of time this week. But like I told you, people, intensity. We did this week, and I want to thank you, Josh, again for joining me this week to talk about. You always treat the most sensitive subjects with the utmost care in a way I probably never could. So I love hearing your opinion on those things. But real quick, where can the people find you, keep up with you, see what you're doing, and got everything going on and all that good stuff?
Yo, Odell, thank you for having me on. This was a really good show, and I appreciate you setting up the platform to have these discussions. Folks can find me on Twitter at Wallstormer, WALLSTORMER. You can find my gaming content at intelligame.us. That's INTELLIGAME.us. You can also primarily check out the Twitch stream. It's Wednesday night, 6 p.m. Pacific at twitch.tv/intelligameus. And you can keep up with any content that you'll find over on just the main homepage, intelligame.us, which needs a refresh and is almost done.
And as always, people, I'm Odo Harmon Jr. You can find me at Odo Harmon Jr. on all your favorite social media platforms. You can find the podcast at FC Podcast 23 on Twitter and at Full Circle Productions on our Patreon. And I want to thank the Patrons, Gabriel Garcia, Rachel Coleman, Baker Rice, Ryan Frazier, Gabriel Cleveland, and always shout out to the Patrons. If you want to be on the show, you can be like Ryan Frazier and join him. We had great fun. Just let me know. Hit me up in the DMs. But as always, people, you can like, share, subscribe for free 99. Won't cost you a dime. But I want to thank you for joining me this week as always. And as always, again, have a great week and be blessed. Until next time, everybody.
A good one.